Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Fireside Tales, episode 78. Tonight's highlight, of course, will be part 3 of Peter Pan. I've set my stuff up in a slightly different configuration this evening, so it's particularly important to let me know in the chat. Can you hear me? Can you see me? You can see that, well, it's visibly different. Hello, Dari. Can you hear me? Hello, Papa. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I have confirmation. Thank you, Christina. All right, let's just take a quick spin through the chat. Paul Carganilla, who I strongly suspect is on East Coast time, has to go to sleep, but he's here. Or was here to say hello. Hello, Christina, darling. Melissa Catano, hi. Dari's here. Nick Davila, how you doing, man? I hope Christy is watching with you. My mom, Pam, is here. Anna Ginavola, hello. Hi, Anna. Hi, Terry. Scrolling. Kathy B. Oh, Paul's cheating. Christina's still first, she swears. Okay. Well. Roger that. Hello, Joe Warren. Hello. Jojo, are you going to Hypnic? I believe that's this coming weekend. I know Tim is on a bike right now, literally riding his way out there. No, actually, he's sleeping at an inn, but he's only riding during the daytime. So jealous that I'd love to go to Hypnic. I'd love to perform at Hypnic, more specifically. All right. Hello, Amanda. Yeah, Jojo is packing and listening. Cool. Well, good. I'm glad to give you good packing entertainment. That's excellent. So I thought I would begin this evening with a poem by S. Foster Damon. I introduced... Thank you, Jojo. That's very sweet. I introduced S. Foster Damon last week and read just one poem. And I think I'll just do one more this evening as brief prelude. This poem is called You Thought I Had Forgotten by S. Foster Damon. You thought I had forgotten? Well, I had, although I never guessed I could forget those few great moments when we both went mad. The other day at someone's tea we met, smiling gaily, bowed, and went our several ways, complacent with successful coldness, yet suddenly I was back in the old days, before you felt we ought to drift apart. It was some trick, the way your eyebrows raise, your hands some vivid trifle with a start. Then I remembered how I lived alone, writing bad poems and eating out my heart, all for your beauty. How the time has flown. I think I'll read another one before we start this evening's show. Get this notification off my fireplace. Oh, how gaudy. All right. I'm quite sure that this poem is about the Venice in Italy, but though I've been there and I've had a very lovely, pleasant experience, my passions lie in a closer zip code to Venice, California. In any case, this poem is called Venice by S. Foster Damon. In a sunset glowing of crimson and gold, she lies, the glory of the world. A beached king's galley whose sails are furled, who is hung with tapestries rich and old. Beautiful as a woman is she, a woman whose autumn of life is here, proud and calm at the end of the year, with the grace that now is majesty. The sleeping waters bathe her sides, the warm blue streams of the Adrian Sea. Adrian Sea. She dreams and drowses languorously, swayed in the swaying of the tides. She is a goddess left for us, veiled with the softening veils of time. Her blue-veined breasts are now sublime, her molded torso glorious. The pity that we must come and go, while the old gold and the marble stays, forever gleaming its soft, strong blaze, calm in the early evening glow, and still the sensitive silhouettes of the gondolas pass and leave no track, light on the tides as lilies, and black in the rippling waters of long sunsets. I'm reading Christy Davila's comment. Hunter, I mentioned my poetry unit with my kindergartners a couple of weeks ago. We've been reading a lot of Robert Louis Stevenson, Shel Silverstein, and Jack Prelutsky. Jack Prelutsky, yeah? Among others. Lovely. Start 'em young. I mean, Shel Silverstein definitely is it. I think Shel Silverstein is one of those, plant those seeds in, the seeds of appreciation early in life, and they will always stay around as golden memories. Huh. Never really thought to categorize it before, or to quantify it, I should say, before, but I could probably recite more Shel Silverstein poems from memory than any other poet. So, good. Some of them are writing their own poems to share at the end of the week. That's wonderful. That is awesome. All right. So before we jump into part 3, I'm going to give you a little synopsis of parts 1 and 2. Here we are. So, J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. When the story opens, we're introduced to the Darling family. Mr. George Darling, honorable, but sometimes a bit bothersome. Mrs. Darling, a lovely, charming lady who keeps her household with love. The children, Wendy, John, and Michael. The nursemaid, Nana, who is a loving Newfoundland hound who takes her responsibilities extremely seriously, and Liza, the household servant and cook. The family lived happily and simply until the coming of Peter Pan. One evening, Peter Pan flew into the nursery window to search for his missing shadow. When he found it, but couldn't reattach it with soap, his sobs woke Wendy. By making her feel needed, Peter convinced Wendy that she should come away with him to Neverland, and Wendy insisted the boys must come too. Wendy, John, and Michael were ecstatic while learning to fly around the nursery room. You see, flying is necessary in order to go to Neverland. Wendy was enthralled when she learned that there was an actual fairy right there in the nursery. And finally, when Tink became still enough, Wendy thought her to be lovely. However, Tinkerbell, known as Tink to her friends, just immediately became passionately jealous of Wendy. Meanwhile, Mr. and Mrs. Darling were at a party across the street, and Nana, poor Nana, was tied up beside her doghouse outside. Nana knew there was mischief about, so she barked and barked and barked until Liza came to take Nana to show her all was fine in the nursery. But the children were only pretending to be asleep, and Liza, who was a bit dense, took Nana back outside. Nana, being a very smart Newfoundland hound, was not as easily fooled. She strained and strained at her chain until she tore free to go fetch Mother and Father Darling. By the time Mr. and Mrs. Darling and Nana arrived at the nursery door, the children had flown. Hello, Susan Kuhn. Welcome to Fireside Tales. So, tonight we pick up on part 3, which will begin with chapter 4, entitled The Flight. Second star to the right and straight on till morning. That, Peter had told Wendy, was the way to Neverland, but even birds carrying maps and consulting them at windy corners could not have sighted it with these instructions. Peter, you see, had said anything that came into his head. At first, his companions trusted him implicitly, and so great were the delights of flying that they wasted time circling round church spires or any other tall objects on the way that took their fantasy. John and Michael raced Michael, getting a head start. They recalled that not so long ago they had thought themselves fine fellows for being able to fly around a room. Not long ago, but how long ago? They were flying over the sea before this thought began to disturb Wendy seriously. John thought it was their second sea and their third night. Sometimes it was dark, and sometimes light, and now they were very cold, and, again, too warm. They were sleepy, and that was a danger. For the moment they popped off, down they fell. The awful thing was that Peter thought that this was funny. "There he goes again," he would cry gleefully as Michael suddenly dropped like a stone. Save him," cried Wendy, looking with horror at the cruel sea far below. Eventually, Peter would dive through the air and catch Michael just before he could strike the sea, and it was lovely the way he did it. But he always waited till the last moment, and you felt it was his cleverness that interested him most. Peter showed them how to lie out flat on a strong wind that was going their way, and this was such a pleasant change that they tried it several times and found that they could sleep thus with security. Indeed, they would have slept longer, but Peter tired quickly of sleeping, and soon he would cry in his captain voice, "We get off here!" So they drew near the Neverland. They had been going pretty straight all the time, not perhaps so much owing to the guidance of Peter or Tink, but it was because the island was looking for them. It was only thus that any one may lose sight of those magic shores, and only thus that one may gain sight of those same shores. "There it is," said Peter calmly. "What? Where?" "Where all the arrows are pointing. Indeed, 1,000,000 golden arrows were pointing it out to the children, all directed by their friend, the sun, who wanted them to be sure of their way before leaving them for the night. Wendy and John and Michael stood on tiptoe in the air to get their first sight of the island. Strange to say, they all recognized it at once. Until fear fell upon them, they hailed it, not as something long dreamt of and seen at last, but as a familiar friend to whom they were returning home for the holidays. "John, there's the lagoon." "Wendy, look at the turtles burying their eggs in the sand." "I'd say, John, I see your flamingo with the broken leg." "Look, Michael, there's your cave." "John, what's that in the brushwood?" "It's a wolf with her whelps." "Wendy, I do believe that's your little whelp." "There's my boat, John, with a side stove in." "No, it isn't. Why, we burned your boat." "That's her, at any rate. I say, John, I see the smoke of the Indian camp." "Where? Show me, and I'll tell you by the way smoke curls whether they are on the warpath." "There, just across the mysterious river." Yes, I see now. They are on the warpath. Right now, soon enough." Peter was a little annoyed with them for knowing so much. In the old days at home, the Neverland had always begun to look a little dark and threatening by bedtime. Then, unexplored patches arose in it and spread. Black shadows moved about in them. The roar of the beasts of prey was quite different now. And above all, you lost the certainty that you would win. At home, you were quite glad that the nightlights were on. You even liked Nana to say that this was just the mantelpiece over here, and that the Neverland was all make-believe. Of course, the Neverland had been make-believe in those days, but it was real now. And there were no nightlights, and it was getting darker every moment. And where was Nana? They had been flying apart, but they huddled close to Peter now. His careless manner had gone at last. His eyes were sparkling. They were now over the fearsome island, flying so low that sometimes a tree grazed their feet. Nothing horrid was visible in the air. Yet their progress had become slow and labored, exactly as if they were pushing their way through hostile forces. Sometimes they hung in the air until Peter had beaten on it with his fists. "They don't want us to land," he explained. "Who are they?" Wendy whispered, shuddering. But he could not or would not say. Tinkerbell had been asleep on his shoulder, but now he waked her and sent her on in front. Sometimes he poised himself in the air, listening intently with his hand to his ear, and again he would stare down with eyes so bright that they seemed to bore 2 holes right to the earth. Having done these things, he went on again. His courage was almost appalling. "Would you like an adventure now?" he said casually to John. "Or would you like to have your tea first?" Wendy said, "Tea first," quickly, and Michael pressed her hand in gratitude, but the braver John hesitated. "What kind of adventure?" he asked, cautiously. "There's a pirate asleep in the pampas just beneath us," Peter told him. "I don't see him," John said after a long pause. "I do," said Michael. "Suppose," he said a little huskily, "suppose he were to wake up." John said, "How ripping!" but decided to have tea first. He asked if there were many pirates on the island just now, and Peter said he had never known so many. "Who is captain now?" said John. "Hook," answered Peter, and his face became very stern as he said that hated word. "Jas Hook?" "Aye." Then indeed Michael began to cry, and even John could speak in gulps, only for they knew Hook's reputation. "He was Blackbeard's bosun," John whispered huskily. "He is the worst of them all. He is the only man of whom Barbecue was afraid." "That's him," said Peter. "What is he like? Is he big?" "Not so big as he was." "How do you mean?" "I cut off a bit of him." "You?" "Yes, me," said Peter sharply. "I wasn't meaning to be disrespectful." "Oh, all right. But I say, what bit?" "His right hand." "Then he can't fight now." "Oh, can't he just?" "Left-hander?" "He has an iron hook instead of a right hand, and he claws with it." "Claws?" "I say, John." "Yes." "John, say, 'Aye, aye, sir.'" "Aye, aye, sir." "There's one thing that every boy who serves under me has to promise, and so must you." John paled. "It is this. If we meet Hook in open fight, you must leave him to me." "I promise," John said loyally. For the moment, they were feeling less eerie because Tink was flying with them, and in her light they could distinguish each other. Unfortunately, she could not fly so slowly as they, and so she had to go round and round them in a circle, which they moved as in a halo. Wendy quite liked it, until Peter pointed out the drawbacks. "She tells me," he said, "that the pirates sighted us long before the darkness came and got Long Tom out." "The big gun?" "Yes. And of course they must see her light. And if they guess we are near it, they are sure to let fly." "Tell her to go away at once, Peter!" the 3 cried simultaneously, but he refused. She thinks we've lost the way, he replied stiffly, and she's rather frightened. You don't think I would send her away all by herself when she's frightened? For a moment, the circle of light was broken, and something gave Peter a loving little pinch. Then tell her, Wendy begged, to put out her light. She can't put it out. That's about the only thing fairies can't do. It just goes out itself when she falls asleep, same as the stars. Then tell her to sleep at once, John almost ordered. She can't sleep except when she's sleepy. It's the only other thing fairies can't do. Seems to me, growled John, these are the only two things worth doing. He got a pinch, but not a loving one. If only one of us had a pocket, Peter said, we could carry her in it. However, they had set off in such a hurry that there was not a pocket between the four of them. He had a happy idea. John's top hat. Tink agreed to travel by hat if it was carried in the hand. John carried it, though she had hoped to be carried by Peter. Presently, Wendy took the hat because John said it struck against his knee as he flew, and this, as we shall see, led to mischief, for Tinker Bell hated to be under an obligation to Wendy. In the black topper, the light was completely hidden, and they flew on in silence. It was the stillest silence they had ever known, broken once by a distant lapping, which Peter explained was the wild beasts drinking at the ford, and again by a rasping sound that might have been the branches of trees rubbing together, but he said it was the Indians sharpening their knives. Even these noises ceased. To Michael, the loneliness was dreadful. If only something would make a sound, he cried. As if in answer to his request, the air was rent by the most tremendous crash he had ever heard. The pirates had fired Long Tom at them. The roar of it echoed through the mountains, and the echoes seemed to cry savagely, "Where are they? Where are they? Where are they?" Thus sharply did the terrified three learn the difference between an island of make-believe and the same island come true. When at last the heavens were steady again, John and Michael found themselves alone in the darkness. John was treading the air mechanically, and Michael, without knowing how to float, was floating. Peter had been carried by the wind of the shot so far out to sea, while Wendy was blown upwards with no companion but Tinker Bell. It would have been well for Wendy if at that moment she had dropped the hat. I don't know whether the idea came suddenly to Tink, or whether she had planned it on the way, but she at once popped out of the hat and began to lure Wendy to her destruction. Tink was not all bad. Or rather, she was all bad just now, but on the other hand, sometimes she was all good. Fairies have to be one thing or the other because being so small, they unfortunately have room for one feeling only at a time. They are, however, allowed to change, only it must be a complete change. At present, she was full of jealousy of Wendy. What she said in her lovely tinkle, Wendy could not, of course, understand, and I believe some of it was bad words, but it sounded kind. And she flew back and forward, plainly meaning, "Follow me, and all will be well." What else could poor Wendy do? She called to Peter and John and Michael and got only mocking echoes in reply. She did not yet know that Tink hated her with the fierce hatred of a jealous woman. And so bewildered, and now staggering in her flight, she followed Tink to her doom. I love that description of Tinkerbell. that she's so tiny she can only contain one emotion at a time. I used to describe my little girl Pushkin exactly the same way. This Pushkin could go from just the epitome of the sweetness, just in the sweetness endemic to motherhood, and then just fly into a total rage, and then just right back to this adorable, incredible little being. God, I miss her. All right. On to chapter 5. Chapter 5. The Island Come True. Feeling that Peter was on his way back, the Neverland had again woken to life. In his absence, things are usually quiet on the island. The ferries take an hour longer in the morning, the beasts attend to their young, the Indians eat heavily for 6 days and nights, and when pirates and lost boys meet, they merely bite their thumbs at each other. But with the coming of Peter, who hates lethargy, they are underway again. If you put your ear to the ground now, you would hear the whole island seething with life. On this evening, the chief forces of the island were disposed as follows. The boys were out looking for Peter. The pirates were out looking for the lost boys. The Indians were out looking for the pirates. And the beasts were out looking for the Indians. They were going round and round the island, but they did not meet because they were all going at the same rate. They all wanted blood, except the boys, who liked it as a rule, but tonight were out to greet their captain. The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers. When they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. But at this time, there were 6 of them, counting the twins as 2. Let us pretend to lie here among the sugarcane and watch them as they steal by in single file, each with his hand on his dagger. The first to pass is Toodles, not the least brave, but the most unfortunate of all that gallant band. He had been in fewer adventures than any of them, because the big things constantly happened just when he stepped around the corner. All would be quiet. He would take the opportunity of going off to gather a few sticks for firewood, and then when he returned, the others would be sweeping up. This ill luck had given a gentle melancholy to his countenance, and had sweetened his nature. Poor, kind Toodles. There's danger in the air for you tonight. Take care, lest an adventure is now offered you, which, if accepted, will plunge you in deepest woe. Oh, dear Toodles, the fairy Tink is bent on mischief this night, and she thinks you are the most easily tricked of the boys. Beware of Tinker Bell. Would that he could hear us, but we are not really on the island, and he passes by, biting his knuckles. Next comes Nibs, the gay and debonair, followed by Slightly, who cuts whistles out of the trees and dances ecstatically to his own tunes. Slightly is the most conceited of the boys. He thinks he remembers the days before he was lost with the manners and customs, and this has given his nose an offensive tilt. Curly is 4th. He's a pickle, and so often has he had to deliver up his person when Peter said sternly, "Stand forth, the one who did this thing," that now, at the command, he stands forth automatically, whether he has done it or not. Last come the twins. who cannot be described because we should be sure to be describing the wrong one. Peter never quite knew what twins were, and his band were not allowed to know anything he did not know. So these two were always vague about themselves and did their best to give satisfaction by keeping close together in an apologetic sort of way. The boys vanish in the gloom, and after a pause, but not a long pause, for things go briskly on the island, come the pirates on their track. We hear them before they are seen, and it is always the same dreadful song. Avast, belay, yo-ho, heave to, a pirating we go. If we're parted by a shot, we're sure to meet below. A more villainous-looking lot never hung in a row on execution dock. Here, a little in advance, ever and again, with his head to the ground, listening, his great arms bare, pieces of 8 in his ears, as ornaments, is the handsome Italian Cecco. That gigantic man behind Cecco has had many names since he dropped the one with which the dusky mothers still terrify their children on the banks of the Guajomo. There is Bill Jukes. Every inch of him tattooed. The same Bill Jukes who got 6 dozen on the walrus from Flint before he would drop the bag of Midores. And Cookson, said to be Black Murphy's brother, but this was never proved. And Gentleman Starkey, once an usher in a public school, and still dainty in his ways. And Skylights. This mate was Captain Morgan's Skylights. And the Boatswain Smee, an oddly genial man, so to speak. Without offense, he was the only nonconformist in Hook's crew. And Noodler, whose hands were fixed on backwards. And Robert Mullins and Alf Mason and many other ruffian long known and feared on the Spanish Main. In the midst of them, the blackest and largest in that dark setting, reclined James Hook. Or, as he wrote himself, Jas Hook, of whom it is said he was the only man that the sea cook feared. He lay at his ease in a rough chariot, drawn and propelled by his men, and instead of a right hand, he had the iron hook, with which ever and anon he encouraged them to increase their pace. As dogs, this terrible man treated and addressed them, and as dogs, they obeyed him. In person, he was cadaverous and dark-complexioned, and his hair was dressed in long curls, which at a little distance looked like black candles and gave a singularly threatening expression to his handsome countenance. His eyes were of the blue of the forget-me-not, and of a profound melancholy, save when he was plunging his hook into you, at which time 2 red spots appeared in them and lit them up horribly. In manner, something of the haughty feudal lord still clung to him, so that he even ripped you up with a look. And I've been told that he was a raconteur of repute. He was never more sinister than when he was most polite, which is probably the truest test of breeding, and the elegance of his diction, even when he was swearing, no less than the diction of his demeanor, showed him one of a different caste from his crew, a man of indomitable courage. It was said that the only thing he shied at was the sight of his own blood, which was thick and of an unusual color. In dress, he somewhat imitated the attire associated with the name of Charles II, and in his mouth he had a holder of his own contrivance which enabled him to smoke 2 cigars at once. But, undoubtedly, the grimmest part of him was his iron claw. On the trail of the pirates, stealing noiselessly down the warpath, which is not visible to inexperienced eyes, come the Indians, every one of them with his eyes peeled. They carried tomahawks and knives. Their bodies gleam with paint and oil. Strung around them are scalps, for these are the Piccalilli tribe, and not to be confused with the softer-hearted Delawares or the Hurons. In the vanguard, on all fours, is Great Big Little Panther, a brave of so many scalps that in his present position they somewhat impede his progress. Bringing up the rear, the place of greatest danger, comes Tiger Lily, proudly erect, a princess in her own right. She is the most beautiful of dusky Dianas and the belle of Piccalillis. Coquettish, cold, and amorous by turns, there is not a brave who would not have this princess as a wife, but she staves off the altar with a hatchet. Observe how they pass over fallen twigs without making the slightest noise. The only sound to be heard is their somewhat heavy breathing. The fact is that they are all just a little fat now after the heavy eating, but in time they will work this off. For the moment, however, it constitutes their chief danger. The Indians disappear as they have come, like shadows. And soon their place is taken by the beasts, a great and motley procession, lions, tigers, bears, oh my, and the innumerable smaller savage things that flee from them, for every kind of beast, and, more particularly, all the man-eaters live cheek by jowl on the favored island. Their tongues are hanging out. They are hungry tonight. When they have passed, comes the last figure of all. A gigantic crocodile. We shall see for whom she is looking presently. The crocodile passes, but soon the boys appear again, for the procession must continue indefinitely until one of the party stops or changes its pace. Then, quickly, they will be on top of each other. They are all keeping a sharp lookout in front, but none suspects that the danger may be creeping up from behind. This shows how real the island was. The first to fall out of the moving circle was the boys. They flung themselves down on the grass, close to their underground home. "I do wish Peter would come back," every one of them said nervously. Though in height, and still more in breadth, they were all larger than their captain. "I am the only one who's not afraid of the pirates," Slightly said, in the tone that prevented his being a general favorite. But perhaps some distant sound disturbed him, for he added hastily, "But I wish he would come back and tell us whether he has heard any more about Cinderella." They talked of Cinderella, and Toodles was confident that his mother must have been very much like her. It was only in Peter's absence that they could speak of mothers, the subject being forbidden by him as silly. All I remember about my mother, Nibs told them, is that she often said to my father, "Oh, how I wish I had a checkbook of my own. I don't know what a checkbook is, but I should love to give my mother one." While they talked, they heard a distant sound. You and I, not being wild things of the woods, would have heard nothing, but they heard it. And it was the grim song. Yo ho, the pirate's life. The flag o' skull and the bones, a merry hour and a hempen rope. And hey for Davy Jones, and hey for Davy Jones. All at once the Lost Boys were no longer there. Rabbits could not have disappeared more quickly. I will tell you where they are. With the exception of Nibs, who has darted away to reconnoiter, they're already in their home under the ground, a very delightful residence, of which we shall see a good deal presently. But how have they reached it? For there is no entrance to be seen, not so much as a large stone, which, if rolled away, would disclose the mouth of a cave. Look closely, however, and you may note that there are, right here, 7 large trees, each with a hole in its hollow trunk as large as a boy. These are the 7 entrances to the home under the ground for which Hook has been searching in vain these many moons. Will he find it tonight? As the pirates advanced, the quick eye of Starkey sighted Nibs disappearing through the wood, and at once his pistol flashed out, but an iron claw gripped his shoulder. "Captain, let go!" he cried, writhing. Now, for the first time, we hear the voice of Hook. It was a dark, mean voice. "Put back that pistol first," he said, threateningly. "It was one of those boys you hate. I could have shot him dead." "Aye, and the sound would have brought Tiger Lily's Indians upon us. Do you want to lose your scalp?" "Right, shall I after him, Captain?" asked pathetic Smee, "and tickle him with Johnny Corkscrew?" Smee had pleasant names for everything, and his cutlass was Johnny Corkscrew because he wiggled it in the wound. One could mention many lovable traits in Smee. For instance, after killing, it was his spectacles he wiped instead of his weapon. "Johnny's a silent fella," he reminded Hook. "Not now, Smee," Hook said darkly. "He's only one, and I want to mischief all the 7. Scatter! Look for them!" The pirates disappeared among the trees, and in a moment their captain and Smee were alone. Hook heaved a heavy sigh, and I know not why it was. Perhaps it was because of the soft beauty of the evening, but there came over him a desire to confide to his faithful boatswain the story of his life. He spoke long and earnestly, but what it was all about, Smee, who was rather stupid, did not know in the least. Anon, he caught the word Peter. "Most of all," Hook was saying passionately, "I want the captain, Peter Pan. 'Twas he who cut off my arm." He brandished the hook threateningly. "I've waited long to shake his hand with this. Oh, I'll tear him." "Right, and yet," said Smee, "I've often heard you say that That hook was worth a score of hands for combing the hair and other homely uses. Aye, the captain answered, if I was a mother, I would pray to have my children born with this instead of that. And he cast a look of pride upon his iron hand, and one of scorn upon the other. And then again he frowned. Peter flung my arm, he said, wincing, to a crocodile that happened to be passing by. I've often noticed your strange dread of crocodiles, said Smee. Not of crocodiles, Hook corrected him, but of that one crocodile. He lowered his voice. It liked my arm so much, Smee, that it has followed me ever since, from sea to sea and from land to land, licking its lips for the rest of me. Right, in a way, said Smee. It's sort of a compliment. I want no such compliments, Hook barked petulantly. I want Peter Pan, who first gave the brute its taste for me. He sat down on a large mushroom. And now there was a quiver in his voice. Smee, he said huskily, that crocodile would have had me before this, but by lucky chance it swallowed a clock, which goes tick, tick inside it. And so before it can reach me, I hear the tick, and I bolt. He laughed, but in a hollow sort of way. Someday, said Smee, the clock will run down, and then I'll get you. Hook wetted his dry lips. Aye, he said, that's the fear that haunts me. Since sitting down, he had felt curiously warm. Smee, he said, this seat is hot. He jumped up. Odds Bob's hammer and tongs, I'm burning! They examined the mushroom, which was of a size and solidity unknown on the mainland. They tried to pull it up, and it came away at once in their hands, for it had no root. Stranger still, smoke began at once to ascend. The pirates looked at each other. A chimney! They both exclaimed. They had indeed discovered the chimney of the home under the ground. It was the custom of the boys to stop it with a mushroom when enemies were in the neighborhood. Not only smoke came out of it, there came also children's voices, for so safe did the boys feel in their hiding place that they were gaily chattering. The pirates listened grimly, and then replaced the mushroom. They looked around them and noted the holes in the 7 trees. Did you hear them say Peter Pan's from home? Smee whispered, fidgeting with Johnny Corkscrew. Hook nodded. He stood for a long time, lost in his thought. And at last a curdling smile lit up his swarthy face. Smee had been waiting for it. Unrip your plan, Captain, he cried eagerly. To return to the ship, Hook replied slowly through his teeth, and cook a large cake of a jolly thickness with green sugar on it. There can be but one room below, for there's but one chimney. The silly moles had not the sense to see that they did not need a door apiece. That shows they have no mother. We will leave the cake on the shore of the Mermaid's Lagoon. The boys are always swimming about there, playing with the mermaids. They will find the cake, and they will gobble it up, because, having no mother, they don't know how dangerous it is to eat rich, damp cake. He burst into laughter, not hollow laughter now, but honest laughter. Ha ha! They will die. Smee had listened with growing admiration. "It's the wickedest, prettiest plan ever I heard of," he cried, and in their exultation they danced and sang, "Avast belay when I appear, by fear they're overtook. Not left is up on your bones when you have shaken claws with hook." They began the verse, but they never finished it, for another sound broke in and stilled them. There was at first such a tiny sound that a leaf might have fallen on it and smothered it. But as it came near, it was more distinct. Tick, 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 tick. Hook stood shuddering, 1 foot in the air. "The crocodile!" he gasped, and bounded away, followed by his bosun. It was indeed the crocodile. It had passed the Indians, who were now on the trail of the other pirates. It oozed after Hook. Once more the boys emerged into the open, but the dangers of the night were not yet over, for presently Nibs rushed breathless into their midst, pursued by a pack of hyenas. The tongues of the pursuers were hanging out. The baying of them was horrible. "Save me! Save me!" cried Nibs, falling on the ground. "But what can we do? What can we do?" It was a high compliment to Peter that at that dire moment their thoughts turned to him. "What would Peter do?" they cried simultaneously. Almost in the same breath, they cried, "Peter would look at them through his legs." And then, "Let's do what Peter would do." It was quite the most successful way of defying hyenas, and as one boy, they bent and looked through their legs. The next moment is the long one, but victory came quickly, for as the boys advanced upon them in this terrible attitude, the hyenas dropped their tails and fled. Now, Nibs rose from the ground, and the others thought that his staring eyes still saw the hyenas, but it was not hyenas he saw. "I have seen a wonderful thing," he cried, as they gathered round him eagerly. "A great white bird. It is flying this way." "What kind of bird do you think?" "I don't know," said Nibs, awestruck, "but it looks so weary, and as it flies, it moans. Poor Windy." "Poor Windy?" "I remember," said Slightly instantly. "There are birds called Windies." "Here it comes!" cried Curly, pointing to Windy in the heavens. Windy was now almost overhead, and they could hear her plaintive cry, but more distinct came the shrill voice of Tinkerbell. The jealous fairy had now cast off all disguise of friendship and was darting at her victim from every direction, pinching savagely each time she touched. "Hello, Tink!" cried the wondering boys. Tink's reply rang out, "Peter wants you to shoot the Windy." It was not in their nature to question when Peter ordered. "Let us do what Peter wishes," cried the simple boys. "Quick, bows and arrows!" All but Toodles popped down their trees. He had a bow and arrow with him, and Tink noted it and rubbed her tiny little hands. "Quick, Toodles, quick!" she screamed. "Peter will be so pleased." Toodles excitedly fitted the arrow to his bow. "Out of the way, Tink!" he shouted, and then he fired, and Windy fluttered to the ground with an arrow in her breast. End of part 3. So it is 10:02, but I'm not going to quite cut it off here. I got a fascinating question this week. But first I'm going to go back and just take a glance through the chat here. Glancing, scrolling. I don't know why Amanda, I'm got no context here, but I see that Amanda, you guys, I'm getting ready for my show on Wednesday and bookmarking videos. I came across physical. I think you mean physical. Come on and get physical. Yeah, it's a ridiculous 80s video. I've got an even stranger, more ridiculous 80s video for you, though, and that would be Total Eclipse of the Heart. And if you haven't ever seen this, the best version I have ever seen of Total Eclipse of the Heart is one that is subtitled. And I'm just gonna just look up subtitled Total Eclipse of the Heart. I can't remember what it's actually called. It's like it went viral like 10 years ago or more. It's like real subtitles or something like that. It is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Right, Terry Smith. Didst thou bite your thumb at me, sir? This is Act 1, Scene 1 of Romeo and Juliet, for anyone that doesn't recognize Terry's reference. No, sir, I do not bite my thumb at you, sir, but I bite my thumb, sir. Terry's going on. That's awesome. Oh, no, Mom isn't the only one that got it. I'm just like 20 minutes behind in the chat. Okay, still scrolling down. Scrolling. Thank you, Zach. Hunter's so cute when he's pirating. Thank you, darling, Christina. Yes, indeed, the Wizard of Oz set the precedence of. So that was so the quote was "lions, tigers, and bears" was in Peter Pan. Now, whether or not Wizard of Oz took those particular beasts in that particular order and then just added the chant with "Oh my," I really don't know, but I think I saw that Christina is going to point out how many other things were blatantly lifted from this actual work. Oh, I don't know enough sea shanties for a lovecast that is all sea shanties, but that's a great idea for a theme. Thank you, Terry. Okay, there's where, now I'm to the chat where Christina is saying, can we talk about how Disney blatantly ripped off Yo-Ho, Yo-Ho, A Pirate's Life? Right, that's a word, that's word for word J.M. Barrie, Yo-Ho, Yo-Ho, A Pirate's Life. Christina goes on to accurately point out this book was published in 1911. Disney made the film Disney made the Peter Pan film in 1953. Disneyland opens in 1955. So when they were designing Pirates of the Caribbean, they were obviously looking at J.M. Barrie's Pirates as some prototypes. For sure. Terry Smith said the song is based off a Robert Louis Stevenson shanty, and maybe Barrie stole it from him. I would have no problem believing that. I've not researched that particularly. I have, of course, read Treasure Island multiple times, but not recently. It was one, Terry said it's one of the Stevenson's books, the late 1800s. Okay, interesting point. Scrolling. No, I don't know Colin O'Donoghue's Hook from Once Shock. You're right. I'm not aware of that. I don't know. Never heard of that. So as I get it, this kind of reminds me, by the way, as I get into voiceover, I think one of the segments of voiceover that I'm going to record is I'm going to record a demo, like maybe a 2-minute, 3-minute demo of just evil characters. So, this Captain Hook voice would be perfect for this. I would love to crowdsource. This is the perfect audience to ask this question. What other evil characters have you heard me do? Or what other voices, characters, dialects, accents have you heard me do that you think would be applicable to specifically evil characters? This is going to be one of those things that I will be very grateful to have in place as a voiceover demo well before Halloween comes rolling around. So, yeah, private message me. I really want to know your suggestions on this. Ah, okay. Now I'm now caught up in the chat to the literal video or literal version. Yes, that's it. Literal. Oh, Scrooge. Thank you, Christina. Okay. So, Amanda, no, I'm not following a guide yet. I may, but as you say, I feel like I should make a demo, but I don't know where to start. I'm kind of, yeah, oh, that Christian Slater voice you did for a book. I don't remember what book. Yeah, it was Vladimir Frisbee in my dad's novella, Unstable Geniuses. Brom Bones. Thank you, Mom. I'm going to have to listen back to Legend of Sleepy Hollow to hear what my Brom Bones voice was, actually. But, yeah, we got a... Okay, damn. That Vladimir Frisbee character would not have occurred to me. Thank you very much. Great suggestion. Okay, so... real quick news update. I believe we are going to be changing the start time for the Lovecast. Starting this Thursday, I will be updating folks on the interwebs as what time we are actually going to start. So keep an eye peeled for that. But I believe it will be later than the thus far traditional 6 o'clock start time. And it's not too late if you haven't yet submitted a private message. I'm still tallying people's responses. Let me know if you have a preferred start time for the Lovecast on Thursday night. Meanwhile, so here's an Ask Hunter Anything. And as always, if you have a question to submit, drop it into the email down here in the bottom... Wait, is it your bottom right-hand corner as you're watching? Yes, the bottom right-hand corner as you're watching. Drop in your questions to askhunteranything@gmail.com. And of course, if you're feeling generous, please drop something into the virtual tip jar over here. We got the Venmos and the PayPals as always. So last week, I addressed the question of what is the term hard sci-fi versus soft sci-fi. And the 5-second recap is that hard sci-fi looks at physics, looks at modern existing technologies, for example, in order to say what is possible in this story. So hard sci-fi would be, for example, Andy Weir's book The Martian turned into a movie starring Matt Damon, where the plot is driven by what the guy needs to do to actually literally survive as a human on Mars. And they typically invent very little technology. They usually just sort of extend technology that we currently have available. If they do invent technology, it will be done very specifically, very accurately, and will extrapolate based on something that doesn't violate physics. Soft sci-fi, by contrast, is usually telling a story that in a science fiction environment or setting that is really trying to illustrate something that is perhaps about human nature. And so this brings us to the wonderful question that Christina Beelan of Simi Valley asked. So I've been really getting into the science fiction works of Philip K. Dick in the last couple of months. I'm on my third Philip K. Dick novel currently. I've read, I don't know, 10, 15 short stories of his sort of intermittently in between. Christina was asking me, so would this be hard sci-fi or soft sci-fi? Now, if you've never read any of Philip K. Dick's works, there is at least some of his stuff that you have heard of, because movies like Minority Report, starring Tom Cruise from, what was that, 2004, I think it was? 3, give or take. Minority Report was based on Philip K. Dick's stuff. Total Recall was based on Philip K. Dick. There's another modern movie that's completely escaping me. Damn. Anyway, there are several science fiction series that are streamable right now. One of them is called The Man in the High Castle. And my favorite that I'm aware of, at least, is a 1-season, 10-episode thing called Android Dreams. No, called Electric Dreams. Oh dear, and that brings us back to the movie that was based on, the obvious one that was based on Philip K. Dick. The most famous of all of these, Blade Runner, was based on Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? So, I'm going to come down quite solidly that no, Philip K. Dick does not represent hard sci-fi. These are not the points that he is trying to make, was trying to make with his plots. Yes, I did say Blade Runner, Amanda. So, his science fiction typically reads more like a futuristic, usually dystopian psychological thriller. When Philip K. Dick did extrapolate technology into the future, he frequently got it quite on the nose, accurate and correct. But most of the time, like one example, just off the top of my head, he envisions a futuristic device in which people carried around a portable psychiatrist in a briefcase. So this would be something like a dedicated laptop that is just your personal therapist, and you talk to it and it confers to you, and it's basically like a chat bot, but has, you know, like several PhDs in clinical psychology. I don't think that he was terribly far off on several projections of technology, but these were never his points. Usually his extrapolations of future technology when he was writing in the 50s and 60s were things that were, again, dystopian in their nature. You could see where the invention should have been to benefit humankind, but was eventually a detriment and was, more pertinently, some sort of challenge to the protagonists that they had to get around. So a lot of Philip K. Dick's stuff revolves around psychics. He's got a couple of different categories of psychics. One who is telepathic, can read minds, as one example, and another category of psychic who can see the future. And these have absolutely no basis in any kind of scientific understanding. So this would very solidly put this outside of the realm of hard sci-fi. Now, there are no psychics that I can recall in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? But there are androids, obviously. So this is something that is sometimes referred to as humaniform robots. So the difference between an android and a robot is an android is human-shaped or human-appearing. They don't necessarily have to be indistinguishable from humans to be androids. They could be just sort of human-like in their appearance. However, I digress. Philip K. Dick was looking in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep as to what does it mean to be human? Why could that not be technologically reproducible? Or could it be technologically reproducible? Could humanity's children be as human or more human than humans? Now, in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, one of the things that sort of draws a line is that the androids there have no capacity for empathy. This is a stark contrast to Isaac Asimov's androids. But my point simply is that Philip K. Dick was just asking the question of what does it mean to have a human experience. And so it's definitely science fiction. It was definitely dystopian and futuristic. But there was kind of a hand wave as to here now in the future, electric animals are pretty common, including humans. So there will be occasional aspects of hard sci-fi in Philip K. Dick's works, but I would not classify his catalog as hard sci-fi. Instead, the reasons to read Philip K. Dick are many, and I suspect I'm going to work my way through at least half of his catalogs before I move on to another author. I'm just really stuck on this guy right now. But it's not because of the hard sci-fi appeal. And with that, I think we'll cut it off there. Join us tomorrow for the Panano Man on the Vaudacity Network. And Amanda is doing Amanda on Demanda, of course, on Wednesday at 7:30. And then we will have Lovecast 107. Is that right? 107? This coming Thursday at a time that is soon to be announced. So stay tuned. Keep reading. I love you all. Good night.